Today's edition of the podcast is brought to you by Coach Me Plus. Coach Me Plus is the leader in athlete management software and a product that I've been lucky enough to be using for a little over a year now. Only rivaled by the impeccable customer service that Kevin and his staff provides, Coach Me Plus's ability to constantly be amoeba-like in their ability to mold and matriculate what you're trying to get across and bring together is absolutely fantastic. Their constant pursuit of better ways and better methods and innovations and progress to their own product is absolutely fantastic. Go over to coachmeplus.com. Check out what they got, guys. It's something that I guarantee you won't be disappointed with. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, I have the absolute pleasure of sitting down and talking with the Assistant Director of Sports Performance at DePaul, Nick Higgins. Guys, Nick and I are going to talk about bridging the gap between performance training in the weight room and what they're doing with rehab with these kids and how it's carrying over to how they work in the field. Nick touches upon how they are able to implement the force plates and develop a plan for all of these kids, both in the performance enhancement area and the return to play protocol. We then start breaking down the process of evaluating newer athletes, which I think is really cool because, when you start, you got to have a starting point with all of these things. And then we talk about what he's actually looking at and for with these evaluations and how it's going to drive the training program for each individual athlete and how it's going to assist in the rehabilitation if something ever were to go wrong. He's then honest enough to share some of the growing pains that he had, guys, and things that helped him kind of get through those, and how he's starting to communicate this information with coaches. And the final thing we talk about is outliers, and I think it's important that we all understand, because hopefully we do at this point, that each kid's their own, and some people just aren't going to fit into the norms of what the athletes in this sport quote unquote look like. So we talk about how they're handling that. This is really an awesome talk, guys. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Let's get right to it. All right. Hey, Nick, thanks for being on with us today, my man.
Yeah, of course. Not a problem, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so there's a lot of awesome stuff going on up there in Chicago right now. So how about you get us up to date with that?
Yeah, things are going well. We're, about a month out from when we'll finish up school here. We're on the quarter system, so our students are roughly here until about the first or second week of June, and then we'll go into our summer break. But we're excited what we're rolling out here. Kind of as discussed with you, we're moving forward with some of our force plates, assessments, screenings, what we're doing from a training purpose and how we're analyzing our data and implementing into our program. So things are really going well. So I'm excited to talk about some of our ideas, and then hopefully, this will spark some interest and we can start conversations with other staffs around the university or around the U.S. and other sports sciences and what they're doing with theirs, and we can continue to model ours over a span of time and do a better job of what we're doing.
Yeah. So the one thing that we really touched upon the few times we've talked about this before is how you guys are really hoping that this bridges the gap between sports med and the coaches and performance. So let's keep going with that and kind of keep moving from there.
Yeah. So when we first, it was probably in December, we got 2 dual Pasco force plates, and I was really given the idea from Dr. Matt Jordan. He discussed, kinetic impulse, asymmetry index, and what he was doing with alpine skiers and ACLs. And the Pasco force plate was a really good opportunity for us, as we just discussed, about bridging the gap between not only rehabilitation process, but our screenings across all student athletes, and then how can we monitor what we're doing as far as our weight rooms, plyometrics, speed training, etc. So we spent probably 2 months really just working with the Pasco force plates and the capstone in there, and a lot of credit to John Waggle down at East Tennessee State, who assisted us with, getting familiar with that system for those 2 months, doing Skype lectures and things like that, just so that we had a better understanding of the kinetics and, what we were doing from the Excel side. And then I was fortunate enough to get in touch with Matt Johnson with the Chicago Bulls, and he was telling me about software force decks that Notre Dame was utilizing and a few others around. So I reached out to them, Jeff Poles in particular, Dr. Dan Cohan on staff with Force Decks, Dr. Troy Flanagan over with the Milwaukee Bucks, Tim Pillow also assisted over in California, and then lastly, Kyle Pearson, who was a user as well. and just how they were utilizing in their different environments while they're student athletes. No environment or situation is going to be the same. And we wanted to get a better understanding of how people were implementing some of their force plate, either assessments, how they were doing their training and results of what they were analyzing. And for us, it was, okay, how can this then be applied into a larger setting? So that's why I think talking with Jeff was great. But then also talking with those who may work in teams of 12 to 14 or just, more on the individual. So it was a really good opportunity for us. And probably since late February till now, we've been utilizing that software and continuing to do the dual force plate training. As we discussed, we're starting probably our end of phase 2, going into phase 3 of how we like to roll this out. And, we've kind of established our different layers, our multi-layer approach, how we're going to do this with our teams. And the first thing that we discussed was, how can we get better information and make better decisions? I really like that quote because that's what we're trying to ultimately do, is get a better understanding of the training adaptations, the rehabilitation process, and where our athletes, current state is. So integrating into the yearly screens was something that we discussed. And if an athlete, for whatever reason, whether it's acute, chronic, or unfortunately surgical procedure they have to go, we want to make sure that we've established baselines and norms for all student athletes. We think that this could do a really good job in views similar to concussions and visions, and have a little bit more of extensive testing, but do this 2 to 3 times a year. Even for, your initial state, if we do, 5 counter movement trials each time, a squat jump will say 3 trials, whether it be a unilateral drop or bilateral drop testing, you're going to establish norms, which is great. And then if for whatever reason an athlete does go down because, sport is chaos, we at least have baselines and norms on all of our athletes. Over a 4-year career, you have, let's say, a sum total of anywhere between 30 and 40 jumps. But any time throughout the rehabilitation process, you've established a norm. You can develop realistic timelines and check marks, whether it's the uninjured or the injured limb, and make comparisons, especially with the dual force plates. So that was kind of our outer look, is how can we provide this for all 200 athletes and include it into, our initial and end of the year screenings. Kind of taking that a step further, as we said, how can this be integrated into sports medicine? And we discussed the assistance in the rehabilitation process. So having comparative data when they're healthy versus unhealthy is a huge thing that we see this really helping us do a better job of analyzing where they are from 1, 2, 4, 6-week post. We've discussed with Dr. Dan Cohan as well, is, again, the rate of injury is so high. We've discussed ACLs in the past, and these things are going to occur, but if you do screenings throughout the process and have these norms, you're able to establish what he calls his post-hab exercises. Is, this athlete may still be at risk even if they're fully returned back to sport and play, but maybe you want to continue to monitor them and have an understanding, okay, let's still integrate these 4 to 6 exercises into your post-hab training when you come back from practice or before practice, because you're always at some risk, correct? Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that, you're always following that. And then Tim Pillow discussed, the difference between rate of force development and rate acceptance. And again, if this is built into the rehabilitation process, you have a better understanding, okay, between those 2 limbs or bilaterally, maybe we've done a really good job of developing, it's the concentric aspect, but we've underutilized our ability to receive that load, whether it's from the loading pattern itself or from the landing itself. So can we use this information then to make sure, as we go through these check marks, are we properly sequencing and progressing exercises? So that was kind of how we believe we can put this into the physical therapy and the sports medicine realm. We were then saying, okay, from a sports performance side, what are 3 different layers that we can really use this information? One we discussed was athletic profiles. Again, maybe we expand the testing and it's Bosco jump test or reactive strength index, but we want to do a better job and get more accurate, classifications and identifiers for those athletes. Talking with Daniel Martinez, who's a very sharp individual, and I recommend others reach out to him after this, is he's done a lot of research and conducted a bunch of trials on his volleyball athletes of, okay, how can I classify what type of jumper they are, the jump strategy that they're using, and then develop, again, a sequence of progression of exercises best for that individual. From the RSI and RSI mod, you're able to classify high force, high velocity, low force, low velocity, etc. How are they utilizing the stress sorting cycle? What ways can you better position that athlete, whether it's from the teaching of it, whether it's the progressions of the plyometrics in line with your sprinting and your weight training, to ultimately put them into a better position to succeed. again, that's such a big thing that we're looking at now is, okay, let's identify these profiles and make adjustments through our periodization plan and make sure we have check marks and move forward. Taking a step further then would be, what can we do every 1 to 4 weeks? So maybe it's not as intensive selection of exercises. Maybe this is just the 3 counter movement jumps. This is where it becomes more practical for us is how much time do we have? How many athletes can we get through this? What is going to be the biggest return on the information that we get? But this ultimately then comes down to the kinetics that we're receiving from the dual force plates and what is, for us, going to make a better, what's going to make a more practical impression on our actual training itself. So we're able to identify the jump strategy being performed by the athletes. We're able to notice the asymmetries, whether it's in the early, late, the landing phase, or the takeoff phase. Certain times of the year, you're going to expect certain metrics or kinetics to be down, and we want to make sure that we're aligning and putting those athletes in the best position. So we have those daily check or weekly check marks, or at the end of a 4-week cycle, did we have an actual transfer? Did we have ultimately what we're looking for? I think that's where we're going to get a really high return on what we're trying to do. We've discussed there's certain markers that you really want to follow. A lot of sprinting is done at the elite level between 80 and 100 milliseconds. So maybe some of our athletes, maybe we look at the time intervals at 150. Researchers came out about change of direction, I believe around 250 milliseconds. And then, greater than that, you're looking at more peak and maximum. So you can use those time intervals throughout the year as check marks to make sure, okay, maybe we're really focusing on one end of the spectrum, but how is that relevant back to sport? Because sport is always, based off time, whether it's ground contact time, whether it's track and field, and you look at swimming and diving and the rest of the sprinting sports, is everything referred back to that. Rarely do you have the opportunity in sport to generate the maximum amount of force in the maximum amount of time. So it's really about how fast you're able to express all of that. So we have, kind of a rubric that we'll discuss a little bit here in a bit, what we're trying to follow for some of those metrics as we move forward. I think the last part would be, how are we doing from a neuromuscular fatigue? So our state of readiness. This is where it gets a little bit blurry for us, and we're trying to phase this in appropriately. So this is maybe something we're not as concerned in the immediate because we're trying to do a better job of understanding, the basis of what we need from a training aspect. But, through the dual force plates, a lot of people are now looking at flight time versus contraction time, time to peak power, time to peak force, eccentric duration, total duration. Gather Cole's been doing a little bit more research on that, and it seems to be a better indicator, again, of the jump strategy. Ultimately, an athlete can reach a maximum height, and if you're just recording jump, for example, that can be whether they're spending more time on the ground or they're generating more force. So again, this just allows a little bit more of an in-depth analysis as far as the acute fatigue that you're seeing. And again, we believe this in the future will do a really good job in aligning with some of the other performance monitoring systems that we have in play here. That, I guess, is our 5 layers of how we see we can really implement force plates into the collegiate setting.
Yes. Now that is a ton for people to bring kind of in and swallow there. But yeah. I think that the next big question is, when you guys are doing all this, and let's say it's 38-year-old Jay DeMayo who walks into the weight room at DePaul as a freshman.
Yeah.
How does this go down? How do you guys break this down? What are you looking at? And then what do you look at that drives the training forward?
Yeah, so we'll discuss more from our sports performance end, and then we'll expand it upon, sports medicine and the physical therapy end. So as we discussed, there's a few kinetics that we're really going to look forward. And we'll say in your initial stage, we'll put you through a series of tests, and we'll just discuss the counter movement, the squat jump. We'll do unilateral, both right and left, because there usually is some difference. Though we have the dual force plates, it's good to get an indicator of just the right versus left versus it being in a bilateral. And then we would possibly either look at the bilateral depth drop, or we look at a unilateral, and you can put those in, as we discussed, into reactive strength index, or from those you can use eccentric utilization, but something along those lines, just to give us a really good profile. If we're really looking probably at the beginning, just the counter movement jump, we'll look at the early, late phase, the takeoff, and the landing phase of that. See some of the asymmetries that are being produced through that. No athlete is symmetrical and not necessarily is being symmetrical 100% correct, but is there shifts? We're using a metric right now about 10% during either the landing phase or maybe the takeoff phase. And we're using that as our gauge of, okay, is this maybe a flag or a higher risk of injury? During the performance of their takeoff, some key intervals we're looking at right now is time to peak rate force development, concentric impulse, concentric peak force is another one, eccentric rate of force development. We view these are things that we can continue to monitor through your first 4 12-week cycles. Training should have a positive adaptation to those. I think in an asymmetry standpoint during the takeoff, again, the concentric peak force, concentric rate force development are other 2 good ones. The landing aspect, as you're a 38 freshman, we're looking at some of the peak landing forces, in comparison to your relative strength scores. So maybe you're receiving such high loads when you land, but you're weak as a kitten. Again, if we can look at these 2 metrics in comparison, well, we know we need to further enhance your strength capabilities as well as looking at your landing, because this might, again, put you at a higher risk of injury. From that, we're also looking at the asymmetry side. So are you receiving more force in one leg versus the other? These are just some early things that we know we can continue to monitor, that we think we can make a practical application to, because ultimately we don't want to, at this early phase of what we're implementing, chew off too much than we can handle. We want to start with anywhere between 4 to 6, kinetics, whether it's during the takeoff or the landing phase, that we know we have a really good understanding. Some of these things can shoot out up to 200 metrics, but then you get so lost in the data and we don't really know, can we truly understand everything? So we want to start off small and continue to expand. But it gives us a really good indication of your jump symmetry and your strategy as you move through it. We would reevaluate, again, whether it's a weekly, every 4 weeks or 12 weeks, make sure we're doing a really good progression. And as we said, the rehabilitation aspect then becomes important as well. They're able to then identify, okay, maybe the time to stabilization, if you were to receive maybe an ankle injury, we at least have these baselines. We know we need to work. Here are 4 or 5 exercises that we think is going to put you in a better position to work on your landing mechanics. And I think that's something that can't be overlooked, is this data has only become practical in the way that you apply it through the sequencing and coaching. So making sure you put people in better postures, make sure you truly teach them how to utilize the stress shortening cycle. And, at the end of it, you'll have a pretty robust profile on your athlete. And again, as you're in your early stage of year 1, just imagine after 2, 3, and 4 years through training that you're going to have a better identifier of that athlete. Or for someone like you in your situation where you may only have an athlete for a year on the men's basketball side because they decide to go professional, you really know as soon as they walk in the door, okay, we have a really good understanding of their jump strategy. We have a better identifier, as we've discussed, through their counter movement and the stress shortening cycle phases and areas that we really need to look. And then we have check marks to make sure, are we having a positive transfer? So we discussed some of those key milliseconds as you look for in the breakdown of the time intervals.
Absolutely fantastic. So as we look back then at this, because you guys have been doing this, it's still sort of newer. This isn't
Correct.
Like something that's been set in stone for a while, but this is something that we've toyed around with and we've looked at, and I know a lot of other people, especially because the force plates you're referring to are pretty fairly priced. What are some things that you could tell people? Because this is something a lot of people could do. This isn't like we're going to get GPS and have to spend $100,000.
Right.
What are some of the learning curves that you had? What is some advice that you could give people that are listening to this and are like, wow, this sounds like something I really could do to help my kids?
Yeah, so as I said, we're probably in the late second phase. We'll be transitioning to our third phase when we start summer. And our initial was those first 2 months when we got the Pasco force plates, it was really understanding and learning what the kinetics were. What were we trying to identify and how were they intertwined and what were the relationships with those? We did a lot of trial and error just on our staff, and that was a really important time for us then, was to connect to others. And that's why I thanked everyone who helped us, with our decisions and helped us understand this process. But those are key reference people for us that we'll continue to reach out to and hopefully continue to expand upon. But don't get so overwhelmed with, as soon as you unwrap it, we have to start implementing it right away. This is a learning curve for sure. So in that initial 2 months, it was just us getting familiar with the Pasco force plates. And then we started to understand that if we wanted to roll this out in a bigger picture, for example, in our situation, 200 plus athletes, we need to put a really good strategy together. Is how is this going to be utilized from the physical therapy end, the sports medicine end, the sports performance, and then the short to long term. As I discussed, some of our short-term plans would be its practical application and influence on training. The long-term being established baseline norms, profiles of athletes, inclusion to the health screening. So we really try to put together a pretty intense outline, and then again continue our outreach. So we talked more with Dr. Dan Cohan and the work that he had done with ForceX and the software, and that was just an option for us. There's plenty of softwares out there, and it's just finding what's going to be best for your environment. What is going to be the most user-friendly to you and amongst your staff, because ultimately we want not just the strength coaches to be running the tests and analyzing, we want our sports medicine to help us out, because rather than a staff of 3, now you're looking at a staff of 9, and that's going to help in the data collection process, which takes a bit of time. It's going to help in the analyzation, and then ultimately, how can you implement it? As we move forward, I think, into our third phase of what we're trying to do in the summer, that's where we're really going to start to now look at, okay, how is this going to influence training? And what we'd ultimately like to have is every 1 to 4 weeks, we're going to sit down as a staff. We'll use a couple case studies. We may discuss, athlete A, B, and C, and see, okay, put it together. What are we looking at? Let's look at some of these key kinetics that we've discussed. How has this changed over time? And what are some ways that we can sequence and do a better job from a programming standpoint, so that when August comes, we at least have established, how are we going to run the test? What are going to be our external cues as we coach this? What is going to be the standardized warm-up, the standardized language to communicate so it's unbiased and we're not putting our own influence into the testing process. So we know from the screening we do a good job. We start collecting the data. And then again, as a staff, we're going to work and hope to help each other out. Is okay, now how are we going to influence what we're working with? And again, we're not looking to roll this out in, this big party. It's like, okay, let's do this step by step, crawl, walk, run, right? Let's take a full year to really identify what we're looking at, how we're implementing it, start on the small stages and continue to expand. Ultimately, you want to have high buy-in to student athletes. And then the last part we haven't discussed was, how are we going to feed this information to the coaches to have them have better understanding of what are we applying amongst our different disciplines and, our different departments.
Yeah, and that last part can really be the trickiest.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's, what is a coach's report going to look like? What maybe you just identify with 3 key kinetics that you want to give to the coach as far as routine check-ins. Maybe it's once a week or it's every 4 weeks, but there has to be communication tied to that piece of paper. It can't just be something that they set on the desk and you hope that they look at it, but they really don't have an understanding of what they're identifying. So taking time out to explain, like, look, this is a trend that we're continuing to see from this individual or amongst the entire team. And, it can be a really good conversation starter with, hey, I think we need to get athlete A, B, and C a little bit more in-season training. We continue to see this. And you explain to them why these 3 kinetics have the influence into sport and what training parameters you could do to help and make sure that they're still in an optimal position to play basketball, but yet not leaning towards, okay, are they a higher risk individual? And I think it's a really good conversation starter with sports medicine, but you can't just throw all these data points at them and not understand, well, are they going to be overwhelmed by it? So how can this tie into some other things that you're already having discussions with? I think we've discussed 3 metrics that we really want to use, along with our sleep report that we do as a weekly return to our coaches. And then we're using monotony, strain, and acute chronic loads. You're just kind of watching those, but it's information that they already understand. We don't want to then say, hey, here's 12 other things that we want you to look at. Coaches already have enough on their plate. So we just want to make sure we're doing a better job of communicating that information. And as we said, maybe year 2 and year 3, we expand upon it a little bit further. But right now, let's just take it. We'll consider we're in the walk state. We've crawled for these past 6 months. We're going to walk into our first year, and then once we really have the ball rolling, then we can expand. Whether it's looking at a little bit more of the kinetics or expand our testing parameters, and then the implementation end.
Yeah, or even more so, like having just a better understanding of what. Because I think that we all think we know what's going to affect what. But it's pretty interesting how somehow things don't do what we think they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and people don't adapt the way that you think they're going to. We put together a really good training cycle, or, we think we have a really good sequence for the next 12 weeks. And everything looks great on paper, on Excel, but then maybe we're unable to communicate that, or the athlete isn't getting it, so we have to look back and say, okay, maybe we have to regress some of these things. And you have to understand that certain times of the year you're expecting to have dips in certain kinetics. So, for example, if you're like in a max strength phase, you'd hope to see a rise in peak force, and you most likely are going to result in a lower rate of force development because your time isn't such an influence. You're really focusing on some of the slower developments. But you understand that, you don't freak out, and then you progress to a faster, you get more to gain speed, and you hope that now, okay, at some of those earlier kinetics that you're receiving, not only faster forces, but you're not spending more time on the ground or, at like, for example, we'll use that 150 millisecond mark. That's a metric that every 4 weeks, you're okay, hopefully they're putting more force in the ground. And if not, is it something that is posturally affected during their acceleration and you're teaching a sprint mechanic or from the landing or from the jumping aspect? So there's a bunch of things like you discussed that you're like, why is that happening? And this will hopefully just give us better information to ultimately continue to reevaluate ourselves. How can we quantify what we're doing rather than just max strength, but can we look at some of the strategies being produced, and ultimately, is there a transfer to some of those other things that we're doing in sport?
No doubt about it. And it's also always better to have, a bigger library of what worked and what didn't for athlete X, Y, and Z, just because, again, I mean, they might be different, but they're still basketball players.
Right. And that's exactly right. You want to make sure you're just providing optimal stimulus at the correct times. And like you said, can we use some of these things to identify when you get a freshman at the beginning of summer? We know these first 8 weeks, we've collected a norm and we're able to establish kind of what is that individual's strategies, where are they in the different aspects of the counter movement. Again, as we talked early, late, the takeoff and the landing. But can we really establish some of these things earlier on before basketball really picks up when they come back to school and all of the other aspects that is, life? Because again, they're going to have these additional stressors. So hopefully this information makes us better coaches, not only in what we're writing, but then how we're explaining to our kids, and then how are we coaching our athletes and communicating that is the biggest thing. But you're exactly right. We're able to hopefully do a better job identifying within the individual, within the groups, and in comparison, how can we progress this athlete for that individual, not how can we progress the entire team.
Yeah, and then I think that, kind of as a closing spot, but thing that would be neat to talk about is a little bit about outliers. Like we've talked in the past about, like we had a kid here was here 3 years, transfer kid, is like top 7 in like 4 statistical categories. And if we were to say, these are the normative values that we would want for a basketball player, he would be so far below all of those, it would be repulsive.
Yeah.
But the dude gets buckets. So like how do you handle a cat who's just skilled in the sports sense, but not skilled in what we would look at in the performance sense?
Right. And I think you have those outliers, as we're discussing about this individual. Maybe you continue to look and see like, man, he's really lacking max strength, but we're talking about a 6'9" athlete who max strength can be, a continued issue to progress. So you look at some of these other things, and are there other aspects of the jump strategy that you can enhance? Or for that individual, can you do a better job of tailoring the program? Because ultimately, like you said, the skill is going to be what keeps them on the court. But that also being said is they have to be available to produce that skill. So is there a better job that we can do in understanding of, okay, these sequences of exercises or these training blocks is to hopefully ensure that whether an injury happens or if it does not, we're putting an athlete in a better position to succeed and hopefully spend more time on the court. Again, maximal strength has its limitations, has some of the transfer. So are there things that we can do to continue to work some of the strengths that he has in balance with dosing in, okay, make sure he works on mechanics A, B, and C, make sure we're integrating exercises A, B, and C, and then the stimulus is, okay, we really want to focus on this concentration, and so that his body is getting the back end of, okay, we're putting you in a better position to be on the court, and then we're enhancing a couple of these things to move forward. And that's where we've discussed with the kinetic aspect in learning better, from the profiling positions, and then from the rehabilitation processes, we're doing a better job of identifying that individual. And again, basketball is getting tougher with the shortened seasons, and it seems like you have them for 1 year and then guys are leaving. So you really have to optimize the training window that you have. And I think this just does a better job of us being more consistent and concise with what we're putting in there as far as the training programs and the different aspects of, again, the weights, but also the sprinting and also the different plyometric series.
No doubt about it. And Nick, before we get out of here, I know you're a guy who's still hunting for more information, willing to share, wants to keep things going. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, we're listed on our website our different contacts. DPU Strength is our Twitter handle. Really, what we're trying to set up for this summer, I've discussed some of the other individuals we've talked with, both in strength conditioning realm and sports science. But what we're looking now is to expand and do Skype sessions in the summer. Do a better job of continuing our education and learning from others. So we're trying to set a lecture series in summer. Maybe once a month we do something like this. We talk shop. We present different ideas. And ultimately, we're all trying to learn and do a better job. As I continue to say, we're very early in our phases. If people are utilizing this, it'd be great to reach out to them, to talk to them more. Again, I think this is something that will continue to trend in our field, and we want to do a really good job of understanding and making this a more practical thing. Again, we're very open. Anyone swings through Chicago, it's a big central hub. Stop on in. We're just trying to get better each day.
No doubt about it. Well, listen, man, this is absolutely killer. Like, this thing's stacked. Like, people are going to have to listen to this one a couple times to catch everything up because this is awesome, man. I can't thank you enough for being so candid with everything, too, bro. This is fantastic.
No, I appreciate it. Like I said, if people have had really good success, please reach out to us. Or if there's others that believe, hey, I've talked to so-and-so and he's doing a really good job, help us out. Like I said, it's great talking to, Cohan and Matt Jordan and Martina. Like, these guys are 4 or 5 plus years ahead of me and what they're implementing with this end, and probably even longer than that. So we're just trying to learn from others and continue to do a better job.
Well, yeah, man. Appreciate it. And we will be in touch really soon, brother.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll be out of Central Virginia, so we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. We definitely will catch up before July.
Sounds
awesome,
good.
man.
We'll have a good one, man.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.
And a huge thank you to DePaul Blue Demons Assistant Director of Sport Performance, Nick Higgins, for being so open, honest, and candid with his sharing. Guys, just so much awesome stuff. I mean, this talk is just, it's stocked. It's stocked with great information, how they're building the program, things they're seeing. Open, honest, candid sharing. I can't thank Nick enough. Absolutely killer stuff. Don't forget, you guys have questions, thoughts, comments. Make sure you, A, post them below, share the talk, and B, you hit Nick up at DPU Strength on Twitter. That's at DPU Strength on Twitter. Guys, as you can see from the talk, he's not holding anything back. So if you guys have any questions, any ideas, if you're using the tech, hit him up, man. Super dude, super open to sharing, and is just trying to do what's best for his kids. The only other thing we ask, guys, is if you did enjoy the talk, please share it through the social media outlet of your choice, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, please do it, www.cvasps.com. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast or YouTube, hit that button, hit that like button, guys, if you did enjoy it. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them below. We're just trying to drive discussion and get the best information out there to coaches as possible. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the talk. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.